This is revolting, an absolute stain on this street.
Brenda Caldwell stood at her fence, arms crossed, watching the white chairs and rose arch being set up next door. She spat toward the fence.
Filthy people turn my neighborhood into a garbage dump. This is where respectable families live, not where street rats throw ghetto parties.
She dialed 911 without hesitation.
Send officers now. Black people. Dozens of them trespassing, polluting my property. I want them dragged out.
Across the fence, Clarence Fletcher, 70 years old, navy suit, white rose on his chest, set down a vase of flowers. He'd heard every word.
Let it go.
But what Brenda didn't know, the bride she just called trash held the power to end careers and send people to prison. The Fletcher home sat at the end of a tree-lined street in Savannah's historic district. Spanish moss hung low from live oaks that had been standing longer than anyone on the block. The house itself was colonial style. White columns, a wraparound porch, and a front door painted deep green. Nothing flashy, nothing loud, just solid and proud. Clarence Fletcher's father bought this house in 1961, paid for it with 31 years of postal service wages. Back then, he was one of 3 black homeowners on the entire street. Now, 60-some years later, Clarence was the last one. The neighborhood had changed around him. Newer homes, wealthier families, whiter faces. But this house, this piece of land, stayed Fletcher. And today, it was dressed for a wedding. White chairs sat in neat rows across the back lawn. An arch wrapped in ivory roses and trailing green vines stood at the center. Glass lanterns lined the stone path from the porch to the altar. Catering staff moved between tables carrying trays of shrimp and grits, sweet tea in mason jars, and peach cobbler set out on silver stands. A string quartet warmed up beneath a white canopy, the sound of violins drifting through the warm October air. 80 guests were expected, family from Atlanta, friends from D.C., colleagues from across the state. Chapter filled slowly as people arrived in their Sunday best, bright hats, tailored suits, children in matching outfits chasing each other around the oak trees. Upstairs, in her childhood bedroom, Naomi Fletcher stood in front of a mirror. The wedding dress was elegant but simple. Ivory silk, long sleeves, a cathedral veil that pooled behind her on the hardwood floor. She wasn't fussing with her hair or adjusting her jewelry. She was standing still, looking at a framed photograph on the dresser. Her mother. Gone 11 years now. Naomi picked up the frame, held it to her chest, and closed her eyes. She didn't cry. She just breathed. A knock at the door. Clarence stepped in. He saw his daughter in that dress and stopped cold. His lip trembled. His eyes filled. "Your mother would have had something perfect to say right now." His voice cracked. "I just got... You look like her, baby. You look just like her." Naomi smiled, set the photo back down gently. Right beside it on the nightstand sat a thick leather binder, legal briefs, case files, a schedule marked in red ink. Even on her wedding day, the work followed her. But she'd closed that binder this morning and hadn't touched it since. Today, she wasn't a judge. Today, she was just a daughter. A bride. She took her father's arm. "Let's go, Daddy." Downstairs, Gerald "Jerry" Dawson waited near the altar. He wore his army dress blues, medals pinned, shoes polished to a mirror shine, posture straight as a flagpole. 22 years of service, 2 combat tours. A retired colonel who now ran a nonprofit building housing for homeless veterans. He stood with his hands clasped, calm on the outside. But when he saw Naomi step through the back door onto the porch, his jaw tightened and his eyes went glassy. The quartet began to play. Guests rose. Clarence walked his daughter down the stone path, one slow step at a time. Sunlight cut through the moss-draped branches above. The scent of jasmine and fresh-cut grass hung in the air. A little girl in a yellow dress scattered rose petals ahead of them. It was perfect. For exactly 4 minutes and 30 seconds, everything was absolutely perfect. Next door, behind a lace curtain on the second floor, Brenda Caldwell watched it all. Her arms were folded. Her jaw was set. On the desk behind her sat a thick manila folder labeled HOA Complaints. It was stuffed with papers. 6 years' worth. 23 complaints filed against the Fletcher family. Noise, vehicles, suspicious guests, lawn height. Not a single one had ever been upheld. But today Brenda wasn't filing paperwork. She'd already made the call. And 2 streets away, red and blue lights were already turning on. The vows had just begun. Naomi stood facing Jerry beneath the rose-covered arch. The officiant, a silver-haired pastor who had baptized Naomi as an infant, opened his Bible and smiled at the couple. The afternoon sun filtered through the oak canopy, casting soft golden light across the ceremony. 80 guests sat still. Even the children had gone quiet. Naomi took Jerry's hands. Her fingers trembled just slightly, not from nerves, but from the fullness of the moment. 11 years without her mother. 22 years of Jerry's military service that kept them apart more than together. And now, finally, this day. Gerald, from the first day I met you. That's when the sirens hit. Distant at first. A low wail somewhere beyond the trees, then closer, louder, then unmistakable. Red and blue lights strobed through the gaps in the fence, flashing across the white tablecloths, across the glass lanterns, across the faces of 80 guests who had come to witness love. Not this. 2 squad cars pulled up hard to the curb. Tires crunched gravel. Engines cut. Doors swung open, one after the other, with the heavy mechanical thud that changes the air in any room, or any yard. The string quartet stopped mid-note. The pastor froze, his Bible still open. Naomi's fingers tightened around Jerry's hands. Her veil caught a gust of warm wind and swept sideways like a flag nobody had raised. Every single guest turned toward the street. Officer Troy Hadley stepped out of the first cruiser. He was young, early 30s, buzz-cut, mirrored sunglasses pushed up on his forehead. His jaw was set like a man arriving at a crime scene, not a celebration. His hand rested on his belt near the holster. Not gripping, just resting. Close enough to send a message that didn't need words. His partner, Officer Denise Sutton, exited the second car. She moved slower. Be more careful. Her eyes scanned the yard. The flowers, the chairs, the guests in tailored suits and Sunday dresses, the children in matching outfits clutching their mother's hands. Her brow furrowed. Something about this scene didn't match the call she'd heard on the radio. Not even close. But Hadley didn't scan anything. He didn't pause. He didn't assess. He walked straight in. Past the gate, past the stone path, past elderly women in church hats who pressed their purses to their laps, past toddlers sitting wide-eyed on their father's knees, past a table stacked with wrapped wedding gifts and a 3-tiered cake topped with ivory flowers. He stopped 5 feet from the altar, boots planted on the grass where rose petals had just been scattered. "We got a noise complaint and a report of a possible disturbance." His voice was loud, louder than it needed to be. Every guest heard it. Every child flinched. "Who's in charge here?" The pastor stepped back. A murmur rippled through the crowd like wind across water. Clarence rose from his front row seat, slowly, deliberately. He straightened his navy jacket, touched the white rose on his lapel, and walked toward Hadley with the quiet, unshakable dignity of a man who had spent his whole life being calm when the world gave him every reason not to be. "I'm the homeowner, officer. This is my property. Has been for over 60 years. My daughter is getting married today." That's all that's happening here. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out his driver's license, held it out. Steady hand, steady eyes. Hadley glanced at it for less than 1 second. He didn't take it, didn't read the name, didn't check the address printed right there in black and white. His eyes were already moving past Clarence, scanning the crowd, slowly, deliberately, like he was cataloging faces, looking for something. Or pretending to. "You got a permit for this?" Clarence blinked. "A permit? An event this size, 80, maybe 90 people, on a residential lot. That requires a city permit." "Officer, this is a private ceremony on private property. Savannah City Code does not require a permit for a private gathering on residential land. I checked before we set up. I've lived here." "Sir," Hadley held up one finger, "I didn't ask how long you've lived here. I asked about the permit. Do you have one? Yes or no?" Sutton stepped closer and spoke near Hadley's shoulder. Her voice was low but clear. "Troy, the code doesn't cover private events. This is clearly a wedding. We should document the call and clear out." Hadley didn't turn his head. "I'll handle it." 3 words. Cold. Final. He said them the way a man says things when he's already made up his mind, and the facts don't matter anymore. At the fence line, right on cue, a figure appeared. Brenda Caldwell walked across her manicured side yard with her arms folded tight against her chest. Her chin was lifted, her lips pressed thin. She positioned herself at the exact edge of the property line, not 1 inch on Fletcher land, but close enough to be heard by everyone on it. "Thank God you're here, officer." Her voice was sharp and carried across both yards like a church bell nobody asked to ring. "This has been going on all morning." "I've told them multiple times about the noise, the disruption, the vehicles blocking the road. They don't listen. They never listen." Clarence didn't turn to face her. His eyes stayed locked on Hadley. "That woman has filed 23 complaints against my family over the past 6 years. Not one, not a single one, has ever been upheld." Brenda's voice sliced back immediately. "That's because nobody takes it seriously. Look at this chaos. Look at what they've done to this street." "This isn't a neighborhood event. It's a takeover. It's an occupation." Hadley raised one hand toward Clarence. "Step back, sir. I need to speak with each of you separately." "I'm standing on my own property, officer." "And I'm conducting an investigation. Step back now." The yard went dead silent. Not a murmur. Not a whisper. 80 people, frozen, watching a 70-year-old black man in a suit being told to step back on his own land at his own daughter's wedding by an officer who hadn't read his name, hadn't checked his address, hadn't asked one valid legal question. That's when Gary moved. He stepped down from the altar platform and walked toward the officers with the same measured stride he'd used on military bases across the world. His dress blues were crisp, every metal aligned, the colonel's eagle glinting on his shoulder, shoes polished to a mirror shine. His posture was straight. His face is calm. His eyes locked forward. He stopped in front of Hadley and extended his right hand. "Officer, I'm Gerald Dawson, United States Army retired. I'm the groom. This is our wedding ceremony, on private property, with invited guests only. Can you tell me the specific ordinance that's been violated?" Hadley looked at the outstretched hand. He didn't shake it. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step back and let me do my job." I'm asking a simple, lawful question. What specific law are we breaking right now? I said step back. And I asked, what law? For 3 full seconds, no one moved. The breeze rustled the rose petals beneath the arch. Somewhere in the back row, a child whimpered and pressed his face into his mother's neck. The scent of jasmine and peach cobbler still hung in the air, a cruel reminder of what this day was supposed to be. Sutton spoke again, quieter this time, almost pleading. Troy, this is a noise complaint. We document, we leave. That's the procedure. Hadley didn't acknowledge her. Instead, he turned away from Jerry and pointed toward the catering station, where a young man in a vest was pouring sweet tea into mason jars. Who's that? Does he work here? He got an ID on him? Then he pointed at a group of men standing near the gift table. What about them? I need names. I need to confirm every person on this property is here with authorization. Clarence's voice came low and firm, barely above a whisper, but it carried. You are not going to walk through my daughter's wedding and card my family and friends like criminals. Not today. Hadley turned back to him slowly. Sir, I have warned you once about obstruction. I won't warn you again. From her post at the fence, Brenda leaned in. See? See what I mean? No respect. Zero. I've been dealing with this for years. They think they own this neighborhood. She said it loud. She meant for everyone to hear. Naomi still hadn't moved from the altar. Her veil drifted in the breeze. Her bouquet hung at her side, white knuckles wrapped around the stems so tightly the ribbon was creasing. Her eyes tracked every movement, every word, every gesture. She watched the officer who hadn't once stated a valid legal basis. She watched her father being talked down to on land his family had owned before that officer was born. She watched Brenda performing outrage from the sideline like a director watching her own show. 2 steps behind Naomi, her cousin Reggie stood with his phone raised. The camera was recording. The red light blinked steadily. He hadn't said a word. He didn't need to. Every second was being captured. Naomi looked at her father. She looked at her fiancé. She looked at the badge on Hadley's chest. And she looked at Brenda, the woman who had spent 6 years trying to push her family off land they'd owned for 6 decades. Her jaw tightened. Her eyes narrowed to a focus that anyone who had ever stood in her courtroom would have recognized instantly. But she didn't speak. Not yet. She knew exactly what this was. She had seen it 100 times, in depositions, in sworn testimony, in case law she had studied for 2 decades, and in rulings she had written with her own hand. But today she wasn't behind the bench. Today she was a black bride in a white dress, watching her wedding be torn apart by an officer who didn't know her name, didn't know her title, and had no idea what he had just walked into. Hadley wasn't slowing down. He was speeding up. He turned away from Clarence and Jerry and walked directly toward the seated guests, not to the side, not around the chairs, straight down the center aisle, the same aisle Naomi had just walked with her father minutes ago, rose petals still crushed under his boots. All right, I need everyone to have their IDs out. We're going to verify that every person on this property has a right to be here. An elderly woman in the second row, Jerry's aunt, 84 years old, wearing a lavender hat with a silk flower pinned to the brim, looked up at him with wide, confused eyes. ID? Baby, this is a wedding. I was invited. Ma'am, I need to see identification. Now. She fumbled with her purse. Her fingers were shaking. The clasp wouldn't open. A younger woman beside her leaned over to help, whispering, "It's okay, Auntie. It's okay." It was not okay. Hadley moved to the next row. A man in his 60s, a retired school principal from Atlanta, sat with his wife. Hadley pointed at him. "You. ID." The man stared. Officer, I drove 4 hours to watch my goddaughter get married. You want to see my license? For sitting in a chair? Sir, I won't ask again. The man reached slowly into his jacket pocket. His wife grabbed his arm, her eyes filled with something beyond anger. Something old. Something inherited. Something that lived in the bones of every black family that had ever been stopped, questioned, and told to prove they belonged. 3 rows back, a young mother pulled her 5-year-old son onto her lap and covered his eyes with her hand. The boy squirmed. She held tighter. Her lips moved silently. A prayer, maybe, or a promise that this wasn't the world he'd have to live in forever. Hadley worked his way through the guests like he was processing inmates, row by row. No please, no thank you, no explanation. Just a finger pointed and a demand made. He wrote nothing down, checked nothing against any list. There was no list. There was no system. There was just a man with a badge asking black people to prove they had a right to exist in a space they'd been invited to with love. Sutton stood off to the side, arms crossed, jaw tight. She watched her partner move through that crowd and said nothing. Later, she would say she wanted to. Later, she would say the words were right there in her throat. But right now, in this moment, she swallowed them. Hadley returned to the front. He'd made a show for the guests. Now he wanted more. I'm going to need to do a walkthrough of the property, inside the house. Clarence stepped forward. Absolutely not. Sir, I have reason to believe. You have no reason. You have no warrant. You have no probable cause, and you do not have my permission. I don't need your permission if I have reasonable suspicion of— Of what? Clarence's voice rose. Not shouting, not even close, but firm. The kind of firm that comes from 70 years of patience finally meeting its limit. Suspicion of what? A wedding cake? A string quartet? What exactly are you suspicious of, officer? Hadley didn't answer the question. He never answered questions. He gave orders. Step aside, sir. He moved toward the back porch, toward the door, toward the home Clarence's father had purchased in 1961 with 31 years of postal wages, toward the hallway where Naomi's childhood photos still hung on the wall, toward the bedroom where just 2 hours ago a bride had held her dead mother's photograph against her chest and breathed. Jerry moved first. He didn't run, didn't lunge. He simply walked to the back door and stood in the frame, feet shoulder-width apart, hands at his sides, chin level. He blocked the entrance the way a man blocks something sacred, not with force, but with presence. You do not have permission to enter this home. You do not have a warrant. I am a retired officer of the United States military, and I am telling you clearly, this is a private residence, and you are not authorized to enter. Hadley stopped, 2 feet from Jerry, close enough to smell the pressed wool of his dress blues, close enough to see every medal on his chest, including the Bronze Star, 3rd row, left side. Hadley didn't look at the medals. He looked at the man, and his right hand moved, slowly, deliberately, from his side to the grip of his service weapon. He didn't draw. He didn't have to. The message was clear. Every person in that yard saw it. Every phone that was recording caught it. Sir, if you do not step aside, I will arrest you for obstruction of justice and interference with a law enforcement officer. This is your only warning. Jerry didn't blink, didn't shift his weight, didn't move 1 inch. Then you'll have to explain to a judge why you arrested an unarmed man at his own wedding for standing in his own doorway. Behind them, the crowd had gone from silent to something deeper, something heavier. Grandmothers clutched hymnals they'd brought as gifts. Men gripped the backs of chairs until their knuckles whitened. Children pressed against their parents, feeling the fear even if they couldn't name it. And at the fence, Brenda watched it all. She didn't just watch. She nodded, slowly, approvingly, like a woman watching a plan come together. Her arms were still crossed, her chin still lifted. She caught Hadley's eye and gave him the smallest tilt of her head. Keep going. Naomi saw it. She saw the nod. She saw the tilt. She saw exactly who was directing this, and who was performing. She stepped forward from the altar. Her dress brushed the grass. Her veil trailed behind her like a ghost of the ceremony that had just been stolen. She stopped 6 feet from Hadley and spoke. Her voice was calm, measured. Every word chosen the way a surgeon chooses an instrument, precise, deliberate, and cutting. Officer, you responded to a noise complaint regarding a private event on private property. You have established no probable cause. You have produced no warrant. You have unlawfully detained guests, demanded identification without legal basis, and are now attempting to enter a private home in direct violation of the Fourth Amendment. I strongly advise you to reconsider your next action. Hadley turned to her. He looked at the woman in the wedding dress, looked at her the way he had looked at every other person in that yard, like she was something to manage, something to handle, something beneath the badge. He smirked. Ma'am, I don't need a law lesson from someone in a wedding dress. Step back, or you'll be joining your husband in cuffs. From the fence, Brenda added her voice, loud, theatrical, aimed at Hadley like a weapon handed to a willing hand. See? This is exactly what I was talking about. No respect. None. For the law, for the neighborhood, for anything. Hadley turned back to Jerry. Hands behind your back. What am I being charged with? Obstruction of justice. Resisting a lawful order. Hands behind your back. Now. The yard held its breath. Jerry looked past Hadley, past the badge, past the smirk, past the hand still resting on the weapon, and found Naomi's eyes. She looked back at him, and in that look was everything. Every year of service, every sacrifice, every fight they had survived separately and together. But underneath all of it was something quieter, something that didn't need words. I trust you. Handle this. Jerry turned around. He placed his hands behind his back. Slowly, with the precision and discipline of a man who had spent his life following orders, even the unjust ones, because he understood something Hadley never would. Compliance is not agreement. Silence is not surrender. The handcuffs clicked shut. A decorated colonel of the United States Army, in full dress blues, medals shining in the afternoon sun, was handcuffed at his own wedding, on his own property, in front of 80 guests who had come to celebrate love. A grandmother in the third row covered her mouth with both hands. A grown man in the back wiped his eyes with his sleeve and looked away. The 5-year-old boy who'd been sitting on his mother's lap stared at the handcuffs with wide, unblinking eyes, learning something no child should learn at a wedding. Sutton finally spoke. Her voice cracked. Troy, I really think we need to call this in before. I've got this under control. He gripped Jerry's arm and began walking him toward the squad car. Naomi watched her fiancé being led away. Her face didn't crumble. Her body didn't shake. She stood like marble, still, cold, unreadable. But behind her eyes, something shifted, something locked into place. The bride had stopped being a bride. The judge had entered the room. 2 steps behind her, Reggie lowered his phone just enough to whisper, I've got it all, Naomi, every single second. She didn't turn around. Her voice came quiet and steady. Good. Hadley had one hand on Jerry's arm and the other on the squad car door when Naomi moved. She didn't rush, didn't raise her voice. She reached into the small satin clutch sitting on the altar table and pulled out her phone. She dialed one number. Judge Elliot Townsend, Chief Judge of the United States District Court, Southern District of Georgia. Her mentor. The man who had sworn her in the day she took the bench. He picked up on the first ring. "Elliot, it's Naomi. I'm at my father's home. An officer has handcuffed my fiancé at our wedding. No warrant, no probable cause. He attempted illegal entry, demanded IDs from elderly guests without legal basis, and is now walking Gerald to a squad car. I need Chief Voss notified immediately." She hung up, slid the phone back into the clutch, stood perfectly still. The breeze caught her veil. Afternoon light hit the ivory silk of her dress. She looked like a portrait, calm, untouchable. But anyone who had ever stood in her courtroom would have recognized that stillness for what it was. Not peace. Patience. The kind that comes right before a ruling that ends careers. 45 seconds passed. Hadley reached for the car door handle. His radio crackled, a burst of static that cut through the warm air like breaking glass. The voice came through, clear, loud. Every word is a hammer. "Unit 14, this is dispatch." The advised. "You are on scene at the residence of Judge Naomi Fletcher, United States District Court, Southern District. The homeowner's daughter is a sitting federal judge. Chief Voss is en route. You are ordered to stand down immediately. Confirm receipt." Every guest heard it. Hadley's hand froze. The color drained from his face, like watching a man realize he'd been standing on a cliff and just looked down. He turned around slowly. For the first time, he actually looked at Naomi, not past her, not through her, at her. Naomi stood exactly where she'd been, veil drifting, bouquet at her side. 6 words. "I told you to reconsider." No anger, no triumph, just a fact. Behind Hadley, Sutton was already moving. She reached Jerry, fumbled the key twice with shaking hands, and unlocked the cuffs. "Sir, I am so sorry. This should never—" Jerry rubbed his wrists. Red marks circled both, the kind that photograph well in evidence files. He looked at Sutton and nodded once, a nod that said, "I know it wasn't you, but you let it happen." 7 minutes later, a black SUV pulled up. No sirens, no lights, just a quiet arrival that meant something far worse. Chief Arthur Voss stepped out in civilian clothes, khakis, polo shirt, reading glasses still in his collar. Off duty, Saturday afternoon. He'd driven here personally because he understood exactly how bad this was. He took it all in. The disrupted ceremony, the trembling guests, the children clinging to parents, the groom rubbing red marks on his wrists, the bride, a federal judge, standing in her white dress beside a squad car on her father's lawn. He walked to Naomi first. "Your Honor, on behalf of the Savannah Police Department, I am deeply sorry." Naomi shook his hand. One firm grip. No warmth. No absolution. Voss turned to Hadley. The young officer stood frozen by the cruiser. His mouth opened, the beginning of an excuse. Voss cut him dead. "Officer Hadley, you are relieved of duty effective immediately. Badge and weapon. Now." Hadley's hands trembled as he unclipped the badge. The metal made a small, final sound, landing in Voss's palm. The weapon followed. Hadley stood stripped of everything that had made him powerful 10 minutes ago. Voss turned toward the fence. Brenda was still there, but changed. Arms fallen, chin dropped, face drained white. "Ma'am, filing a false police report is a criminal offense under Georgia law. You'll be hearing from detectives. I suggest you contact an attorney." Brenda stammered. "I had every right. This is my neighborhood. I just—" "Ma'am," Voss raised one hand. "This is a wedding on private property. Go inside your home, quietly. Brenda backed away, step by step, turned and walked inside. The screen door slapped shut behind her. In the yard, 80 guests sat in stunned, trembling silence. Not the silence of tragedy, the silence of correction. The moment when the air shifts and the world tilts back towards something that looks like justice. Hadley stood beside his cruiser with nothing left. No badge, no weapon, just a uniform that no longer meant anything, and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. He took 2 steps toward Jerry. "Sir, I didn't know. If I had known." Naomi stepped between them. Her voice carried the same tone she used when addressing attorneys who had wasted her courtroom's time. Measured, final, impossible to appeal. "You didn't need to know who I was. The law you swore to uphold applies the same whether the bride is a judge or a janitor. You weren't wrong because of who we are. You were wrong because of what you did." Hadley opened his mouth. Nothing came out. A second unit arrived. 2 officers escorted Hadley to the back seat. He climbed in without resistance. The door shut with a hollow thud. The cruiser pulled away. No sirens, no lights. Just gone. Sutton remained behind. She approached the supervising sergeant and gave a full voluntary statement. "I knew he was escalating. I said something twice, but didn't physically intervene. I should have stopped him. I need that on record." She was placed on administrative leave. She handed over her body camera footage without being asked. The sergeant noted her as fully cooperative. The yard had changed. The flashing lights were gone. The cruisers had pulled away. 80 guests sat in white chairs, still as statues, unsure whether the day was over or just beginning. Clarence Fletcher stood up. It took him a moment, one hand on the chair back, one hand smoothing his jacket. He touched the white rose on his lapel, still in place. He walked to the front and faced the guests. "We have waited too long and come too far to let anyone steal this day. My baby girl is getting married, right here, right now, on this land." Silence. Then Jerry's aunt, the 84-year-old in the lavender hat who'd been asked for ID like a suspect, started clapping. Slow at first, then the row behind her joined, then the next, then everyone. The string quartet picked up their bows. The wedding march filled the yard again, carrying something heavier than melody this time, something earned. The pastor returned beneath the arch, opened his Bible to the same page, looked at Naomi and Jerry with wet eyes. "Shall we try this again?" Naomi laughed. The first time in an hour. The sound broke through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. They stood at the altar. Jerry took her hands. The red marks on his wrists were still visible beneath his cuffs. Naomi looked down at them, then up at him. Jerry spoke his vows. His voice cracked on the 3rd line. "I chose you because you are the strongest person I've ever known. I've led men in combat, but I have never seen anyone stand the way you stood today. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't lose yourself. You became the most powerful person in that yard without saying more than 50 words. I am so proud to stand beside you for the rest of my life." Naomi blinked once, then spoke her own vows, the same ones she'd been interrupted saying an hour ago. This time, no sirens, no boots on the grass, no radio static. Just her voice, his hands, and the October sun. She finished every word. The pastor pronounced them married. Jerry kissed his bride. 80 guests erupted, cheers, tears, applause shaking the oak leaves overhead. The 5-year-old boy who'd watched the handcuffs with wide eyes was now throwing rose petals in the air and laughing. Next door, behind a second-floor curtain, Brenda Caldwell watched the celebration she had tried to destroy. She wasn't standing tall anymore. She wasn't smirking. She picked up her phone with trembling fingers. I think I need a lawyer. The video hit the internet before the cake was cut. Reggie uploaded the footage to his social media that evening. Unedited, 11 minutes long, every second intact. The thumbnail alone was enough to stop anyone mid-scroll. A black man, in full military dress blues, handcuffs on his wrists, standing beside a squad car, while a bride in a white wedding dress watched from 6 feet away. By midnight, it had 2 million views. By Sunday morning, it was on every major news network in the country. The headline wrote itself. Every outlet ran some version of the same words. Officer handcuffs decorated colonel at his own wedding. Bride is federal judge. Cable news played the clip on loop. Morning shows opened with it. Social media turned it into a firestorm that no press release or department statement could contain. And the footage didn't just show the arrest. It showed everything. Hadley marching down the aisle through seated guests, the 84-year-old aunt fumbling with her purse, the young mother covering her child's eyes, Clarence being told to step back on his own property, Jerry asking a lawful question and being met with a hand on a weapon, Naomi reciting the Fourth Amendment in her wedding dress and being told she'd be put in cuffs for it. And it showed Brenda, at the fence, arms crossed, nodding. That image, the neighbor nodding while a man was handcuffed, became its own symbol. Screenshots circulated with one-word captions. People recognized the gesture. They'd seen it before. In their own neighborhoods, at their own front doors, in their own lives. Monday morning, the Savannah Police Department's Internal Affairs Division opened a formal investigation. By Tuesday, the FBI had joined, a federal civil rights inquiry under Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. Investigators pulled everything. Hadley's body camera, which he had forgotten to activate. The dash camera from his cruiser, which captured audio of the entire encounter. Sutton's body camera, which she had surrendered voluntarily and which provided the clearest, most damning angle of all. Reggie's phone footage. Security camera footage from 3 neighboring properties. Witness statements from all 80 guests. The picture that emerged was not complicated. It was simple, systematic, and documented from 5 different angles. Then they pulled Hadley's service record. 14 complaints were filed against him in 4 years. 11 from black residents, 3 from Latino families. Excessive force allegations, twice. Unlawful detention, 3 times. Each complaint had been reviewed internally. Each one had been closed with the same 2 words: insufficient evidence. Not anymore. The grand jury convened within 3 weeks. The indictments came fast. Against Officer Troy Hadley, unlawful arrest, civil rights violations under Federal Statute Section 242. Attempted illegal search and seizure, misconduct in the office, 4 counts, each one carrying federal weight. His police certification was revoked by the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council before the trial even began. He would never wear a badge again in any state. Against Brenda Caldwell, filing a false police report under Georgia Code Section 16-1026. During the investigation, detectives documented her history. 23 complaints against the Fletcher family over 6 years, not a single one substantiated. The pattern was so clear, it practically drew its own diagram. Prosecutors added a charge enhancement based on demonstrated racial motivation. The Fletcher family filed a separate civil suit against Brenda: harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and interference with a private event. Their attorney was Reggie. He had been preparing for this case, in one form or another, for 6 years. Hadley's trial was held in federal court, A different district since Naomi recused herself entirely. She didn't make calls, didn't pull strings, didn't need to. The evidence spoke in a voice louder than any judge's. The trial lasted 9 days. Sutton took the stand on day 3. She testified clearly and without hesitation. She described what Hadley did, what she failed to do, and why. She didn't make excuses. When the defense attorney asked her if she believed Hadley acted with racial bias, she paused for 4 seconds. "Yes, I do. And I should have stopped it." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty. All counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. The presiding judge, a white woman in her 60s who had spent 30 years on the federal bench, looked at Hadley and delivered words that would be quoted in newspapers across the country. She called it a grotesque abuse of public trust. She said the badge was meant to protect, not terrorize. She said that what happened in that yard was not a mistake. It was a choice, made repeatedly at every turn when a different choice was available. 4 years. Federal prison. Hadley showed no expression. He was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, the same kind he had put on Jerry's wrists 5 weeks earlier. Brenda's case was resolved faster. Her attorney advised her that the pattern of 23 baseless complaints made a trial unwinnable. She pleaded no contest. The sentence? 12 months probation, 200 hours of community service, specifically at the Savannah Civil Rights Education Center, where she would spend her weekends learning the history of the very people she had spent 6 years trying to silence. A restraining order, 500 feet from the Fletcher property, and full payment of the Fletcher family's legal fees in the civil suit. Tanya Brooks, Naomi's maid of honor and a journalist at a Savannah television station, produced a feature segment that aired nationally. The piece didn't just cover the wedding. It covered the pattern, the 23 complaints, the 14 internal affairs files on Hadley that went nowhere, the system that let both Brenda and Hadley operate unchecked for years. The Savannah Police Department announced a comprehensive reform package within the month. Mandatory de-escalation training for all officers, a civilian oversight board with subpoena power, a new protocol for noise complaints that required supervisory approval before any on-scene escalation, and an independent review of every excessive force complaint filed in the past 5 years. Naomi was invited to deliver the keynote address at the National Bar Association's annual conference. She accepted. She stood at the podium, not in her judicial robe, not in her wedding dress, but in a simple black suit, and spoke for 22 minutes. She didn't talk about herself. She talked about every family that didn't have a federal title to protect them, every cookout interrupted, every front porch where someone was asked to prove they belonged, every wedding, birthday, funeral, and Sunday dinner that had been treated as a threat simply because of the color of the people gathered. The room gave her a standing ovation that lasted 3 full minutes. A scholarship fund was established in the Fletcher family name for law students from underrepresented communities. Jerry's nonprofit received a wave of donations that allowed him to expand his veterans housing program into 2 new cities. And the video, Reggie's 11-minute recording, was entered into the permanent collection of the National Museum of African American History and Culture in Washington, D.C. Some evidence gets filed away. Some evidence changes things. 6 months later, the Fletcher house still stood at the end of that tree-lined street in Savannah. Same white columns, same green door, same wraparound porch where 3 generations had sat and watched the world change around them without ever moving from their land. Clarence was on the porch. Evening light came through the oak branches in long, golden streaks. A glass of sweet tea sweated on the railing beside him. The chair next to his was empty, the one where his wife used to sit. He didn't fill it. Never had. But tonight he looked at it and smiled instead of ached. Inside the house, the wedding photo sat on the mantel, Naomi in ivory, Jerry in dress blues. 80 guests behind them, standing, clapping, crying. And if you looked closely, in the bottom left corner, you could see a 5-year-old boy mid-throw, launching rose petals into the air with both hands. The best photo of the day. The one that made it real. Naomi was back on the bench. Same courtroom, same rigor, same fairness she had carried her entire career. Attorneys who appeared before her noticed something, though. A new weight in the way she listened to testimony about traffic stops, noise complaints, and officers who forgot to turn on their body cameras. She didn't speak about the wedding in court. She didn't have to. Everyone knew. And everyone understood that the woman behind that bench had lived the cases she was ruling on. Jerry broke ground on a new veterans housing development in March. 42 units. Permanent supportive housing for homeless veterans. The kind of housing that didn't exist when he first came home from his second tour and watched men he'd served with sleep under bridges. At the ribbon-cutting ceremony, he wore his dress blues. A reporter asked if it was difficult to put them on again after what happened. Jerry looked down at the medals on his chest and shook his head. These belong to me. No one gets to turn them into something painful. Not anymore. One evening in April, Naomi found a letter in her courthouse mailbox, handwritten. No return address on the envelope, but she recognized the postmark, Savannah. It was from Denise Sutton. Sutton had resigned from the force 3 months after the wedding. She'd enrolled in law school, first semester, night classes, working part-time to pay tuition. The letter was short, 3 paragraphs. An apology that didn't make excuses. A thank you that didn't ask for forgiveness. And one line at the end that Naomi read twice. I stood there and did nothing. I won't spend the rest of my life being that person. Naomi wrote back the same week. Next door to the Fletcher house, a for sale sign stood in Brenda Caldwell's front yard. It had been there for 2 months. She was moving. Where? Nobody asked. Nobody cared enough to. On her last day, neighbors watched her load boxes into a rental car, alone. No one helped carry anything. No one crossed the street to say goodbye. No one waved. The woman who had spent 6 years trying to decide who belonged in that neighborhood had gotten her answer. She didn't. The HOA complaint folder, the thick manila one she had kept on her desk like a trophy, sat in the recycling bin at the curb. 6 years of grievances, 23 baseless reports, all of it waiting for a trash truck that would come Tuesday morning and take it exactly where it belonged. Hadley was serving his sentence in a federal facility in South Georgia. His appeal had been filed and denied. His name was now a case study in police training academies across 3 states, listed under a module titled Abuse of Authority, What Not to Do. Cadets would study his decisions the way medical students study surgical errors, not to understand the man, but to prevent the next one. Justice doesn't always arrive on time. It doesn't always arrive at all. But on one Saturday afternoon in Savannah, Georgia, it showed up in a white dress and a cathedral veil. And it didn't need to raise its voice. The Fletchers didn't need a title to deserve dignity. But it shouldn't have taken one to receive it. That's the part that stays with you. Not the badge being surrendered. Not the handcuffs clicking open. Not the guilty verdict. Those are satisfying, and they should be. But the part that stays is the question underneath all of it, the one that doesn't have a comfortable answer. What happens to the family that doesn't have a federal judge in a wedding dress? What happens when there's no phone call to make, no chief who shows up in 7 minutes, no camera recording every second? What happens then? That's not a story question. That's a real one, and it's yours to answer. So tell me, if you were sitting in one of those white chairs, watching it unfold, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet? Would you have spoken up? Would you have a hit record? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story made you feel something, if it made you angry or hopeful or both, then share